The Mother and the Child by Maria Montessori. Part 1. The mothers of today take far more intelligent care of their children than did the mothers of the past, and this is not because they love their children more, but because the science of medicine, by establishing rules for child hygiene, has materially aided the mission of motherhood. Thus, the treatment according the child has brought great change to the mission of motherhood. Above all, it has virtually transformed some of the principles, that is to say, some of the ideas, as to the real influence that we may have on a child as he develops. Let us rapidly survey these transformations. What used to take place? Perhaps there are some who still remember having seen certain practices considered a universal dogma at one time. The child was wrapped in swaddling clothes to avoid having crooked legs. His tongue had to be clipped so that he might someday talk. He always wore a cap to keep his ears from standing out. Care was always taken to lay the baby down in such positions as not to run the risk of doing permanent injury to his delicate head. The good mothers also rubbed the little newborn baby's nose so that it would grow long and slender and not remain too short and stumpy. They even put gold earrings on him at birth, because this supposedly made his sight keener. In some countries these practices are doubtless forgotten, but in some they are still in use. Who does not remember the means used to help the child in learning to walk? In the first months, at the time of life when the nerve paths are not yet developed and it is impossible for the child to coordinate his movements, mothers would waste several half hours a day trying to teach the child to walk. They held the babe by his body and used the disordered movements of the little feet to delude themselves into thinking that these were the beginnings of walking. And because the child began, little by little, to put one foot in front of the other, and to gain confidence in the use of his feet, the mothers attributed all this progress to their previous efforts. When the control of movement was somewhat established, but not equilibrium, or the power of standing upon his feet, the mothers used straps to support the baby body, and thus had him walk with them, or when they could not spare the time, they would put the child into an ambulator, which, having a broad base, could not tip over, and there he stayed, his arms hanging over the side, his little body supported by the rim, and though he did not know how to stand still, he went forward by moving his feet, that is, he walked. What did science reveal when it entered the field of child welfare? Certainly, it offered no sure means of strengthening the nose and ears, and it did not enlighten the mothers as to the ways of teaching a child, even from birth, how to walk. No, first of all, it uttered the firm conviction that nature herself sees to determining the shape of the head, nose and ears, that man will talk well without the need of clipping his tongue, that the legs grow straight naturally. Not only this, but the fact that the function of deambulation is established of itself in nature and has no need of assistance. Hence we must let nature act on its own accord as freely as possible, and the more a child is left free to develop, the sooner and the more perfectly will he attain his higher forms and functions. Abolish then the swaddling bands, and recommend great peace and comfort when he rests. The child, with his limbs free, should be left lying quietly, not tossed up and down or rocked as many used to do, thinking they were amusing him. Neither should he be forced to walk before his time. When the hour comes, he will arise and walk. Today almost everyone is convinced of these facts, and swaddling cloths, girths and ambulators have almost disappeared from sale. Children therefore have straighter legs and walk better and at an earlier age than formerly. This fact is well established, and it is a great relief, for in truth what a burden it was to think that the straightness of the legs, the form of the nose, of the ears, of the head, were all the direct results of our care. What a responsibility for which all felt unfit. What a joy to say, "It is nature's task. I will leave the child free, I will watch him grow in beauty, I will assist quietly at the miracle." These new concepts have up to now been confined to the body. As regards the inner life of the child, there has not been a like progress, for in this we are still in a stage similar to that other which by the help of science we have left behind. Something of the kind is coming for the child's inner life. Indeed, we are assailed with questions. The character must be molded, the intellect developed, the feelings guided, and we ask ourselves, what shall we do? Here and there we touch the child's soul, or we confine it more or less, as the mothers did by rubbing the child's nose or bandaging his ears. We hide our anxiety behind a sort of medium success, since men do grow up with character, intellect and feelings. When, however, all these qualities are lacking, we are overcome. What shall we do? Who can endow a degenerate with character, an idiot with intellect, a moral degenerate with feelings? If, indeed, it were by merely touching the soul here and there that men gained all these qualities, then it would suffice to touch a little more energetically him who was lacking. But such is not the case. Hence we are no more creators of the inner form than of the outer. It is nature, it is creation which directs all these things. When once we are convinced of this, there is born within us the principle of the necessity of not putting obstacles in the way of natural development, and instead of so many different problems, such as what to do to develop character, intellect and feelings, one problem only would present itself at the basis of all education: how to give the child freedom. In this freedom there must be included principles analogous to those which science dictated for the forms and functions of the body during the period of growth, a freedom in which the head, nose and ears became more beautiful and deambulation the most perfect possible, according to the congenital forces of the individual. So here freedom as the only means should carry the character, the intellect and the feelings to the highest point of development possible to the individual, and it should give to us, who are directing this work, peace and the opportunity of contemplating the miracle of growth. This freedom liberates us too from the anxious burden of an imaginary responsibility and a dangerous illusion. Woe to us if we believe ourselves responsible for things which do not concern us, and delude ourselves into thinking that we might bring things to pass which, on the contrary, take place without any reference to us. What then has become of our real mission, of our real responsibility? What wrongs, what real sins are we committing? The history of the child's physical redemption has for us a most interesting sequence. It does seem strange to us today to consider that at a time when infant diseases were a scourge, it was not the death rate which held the attention, but the form of the nose or the legs, whereas the vital question passed unnoticed. The mortality statistics revealed such high figures that the phenomenon was named the slaughter of the innocents. The famous statistics of Lexis, which do not refer to any one country but to the average death rate of humanity in general, shows that this terrifying truth was universal. It has two factors. One undoubtedly is the characteristic weakness of the child. The other, the want of protection from his weakness, a lack which was general among all peoples. Certainly there was no want of goodwill or feeling of love toward the children, but a something unknown was wanting, the means of combating a dreadful peril which took place all unnoticed. We know today that infectious diseases, especially those of intestinal origin, were the cause of such great mortality. Intestinal diseases diminish nutrition, or produce poisons at an age in which the delicate tissues are most sensitive, and they were responsible for almost the entire slaughter. Then the wrongs which were being habitually committed against infants stood forth. Wrongs comprised in a lack of cleanliness which today would astound us, and in an absolute want of any rules as to the feeding of babies. The soiled linens which enveloped the child were often merely hung out to dry several times and used over again and again before being washed. No care was taken to wash either the nipple or the baby's mouth, in spite of the fact of fermentation so serious to cause local sickness. The infant nursed without any regularity. Night and day the baby cries governed the time of nursing, and the more indigestion and suffering increased, the more his feedings were increased, thus aggravating his condition. Science gave the simplest rules. It advised the most perfect cleanliness possible, and it pointed out a principle so evident in itself that it was amazing that everyone had not understood it from the beginning, namely, a baby, like an adult, must fast at times and can take new food only after the preceding has been digested, and so the nursing periods should come at regular intervals, varying according to age, following the modifications of the physiological functions in their development. Nor should crusts of bread be given to the child, as so many mothers do, especially the very poor, to calm his crying, for he might swallow the hard particles before he is able to digest them. It was science which, redeeming the children, brought about trained nurse girls, cradles for all, rooms and proper clothing, and especially prepared food, made by great concerns for the hygienic feeding of children after weaning. Indeed, it created an entirely new world for them, intelligent, clean and pleasing. The child became the new man, who has wrested his right from life and who has, therefore, had to create an environment for himself. Thus we see that infant mortality diminishes in direct proportion to the diffusion of the rules of child hygiene. If, therefore, we say that spiritually also the child should be left free because nature, and not we, is the creator who molds him, we do not mean by that to abandon him and to leave him to his own devices. Perhaps, however, if we study the situation, we will realize that, though we will not be able to act directly on the child's individual forms of character, intellect and feeling, which we have overlooked, and on which depend the life and death of the spirit, yet there are a certain series of obligations and a round of cares which it is our duty to perform. The criterion of liberty is not then one of abandoning the child, but by leading us from illusion to truth, it points the way to the positive and most efficacious manner of caring for children. Freedom of the child of today merely a physical freedom. Civil rights of children in the 20th century. Hygiene has freed the child's physical life. The external proofs, which consist in the doing away with the swaddling clothes, in the open-air life, in giving sufficient rest and the like, are in general the most visible and tangible part, but they constitute only a means of attaining freedom. A far more important step toward freedom has been that of removing from the path of life the dangers of disease and death. As soon as the obstacle caused by some of these fundamental errors was removed, not only did the children survive in greater numbers, but it was proved that they grew better and healthier. Was it really hygiene which helped them to increase in weight, in stature, in beauty, and also in general growth? Hygiene did not do all of this. The Gospel says, "Who is able to add 1 cubit to man's stature?" Hygiene only freed the child's body from the obstacles which were preventing his growth. There were external bands that hindered the growth and the entire natural evolution of life. Hygiene broke these bands asunder, and everybody realized that a liberation had taken place. When this was an accomplished fact, everyone said, "Children must be free." Now the direct relation between attained conditions of physical life and acquired freedom is universally felt. In that way the child is treated like a little plant. For years, plants in an orchard or a garden were well kept. They had gained rights and privileges which the child had only just now attained. Good food, oxygen, a suitable temperature, and minute protection from the parasites which cause plant disease. Today, the son of a prince can have as good care as the most beautiful rosebud in a lovely villa. The old saying, "A child is like a flower," is what we hope today to make a reality, but it is as yet a privilege, accorded only to the more fortunate children. But let us arouse ourselves from so great a mistake. The child is a man. What is enough for a plant is not enough for a human being. We must always hold before us the picture of the child and the future man. We must see him in the bustling humanity which seeks with such heroic efforts to attain the goal of life. End of part 1.